So I think we need to be very careful with generalizing from other people's success in the outcomes that they actually get. And we often sort of want to look at people that were or that appear highly successful and we want to mimic what they're doing, right? We sort of get this idea that hey, they're a multi-billionaire or whatever, right? Like yeah, that they are doing extremely well in sports or whatever the combination, athleticism, athletics or academics, whatever that particular thing is. We want to copy what they're doing and imitate what they're doing. We sort of say, hey, why can't I do exactly what they're doing and get the same outcomes? Here's the thing: is that there is a lot that happens between when you actually do something and the outcomes that you actually get. It doesn't necessarily mean if you perform these actions that you're going to get some sort of immediate outcomes from it. There is not like that strong of a correlation. There might be some of a correlation, meaning that if you perform these actions, you're going to get an outcome that is similar, but we're talking like a 10%, right? Like relationship between the two. So you have to remember when you're doing that, okay, why isn't this happening to me? There's lots of different factors that go in terms of why this doesn't happen to you when you perform those actions. But what I can say is that on average, in aggregate, if you perform basic actions, basic little things like repeating the same thing, looking at how you can perfect something, looking at how you can um, garner, I guess, attention for that thing, all those kind of things, those little basic things, they add up, and you might not necessarily get some outstanding outcome, but you have an incremental improvement. And I think we should be all striving for that incremental improvement, not looking for how do I get these spectacular outcomes that allow us to, I don't know, something that everybody would be very impressed with. But instead, what you should be looking at is those incremental, one-off things. And if you think, I want you to sort of get back to thinking about the stock market, right? The best companies in the world improve at 10% in the world, or 10% per year. What does that mean for you? Right? So the best companies in the world are improving at 10% per year. Why can't you think about that I should be improving at 10% per year? Why should I think like I should be spectacularly well today compared to last year or a month ago? 10% is really tiny. It's not going to feel like a lot. If you are, let's say you're making, I don't know, let's say you're making $100,000 for example, which is, very much on the high end of salaries. Well, that means next year you'll be making 110. You know, why should you expect more than that? Like, it doesn't make any sense, right? Like, if you're making, and let's say at you're making $5,000, the next year you should be making, $5,500, and that is actually a good, solid improvement. That's actually really good improvement. So I think we should really recalibrate what we're thinking about, and what we're looking for is these gradual, slow wins over time. It's not anything spectacular. It's not big. It's just little bits repeated over time, and those little bits turn into something that is miraculous. Now the little bits are really hard to do. The day to day to get up and do the same thing over and over and over again feels like monotony. It feels grinding. It feels completely different than what I'm actually saying, right? It feels all of the negative emotions that you currently are experiencing. And that is normal. That is absolutely normal to go through that. And, if it doesn't feel like that, I don't know. I don't think that I don't know, you're somehow special in some sort of way, right? Like you're a really unusual person. Most of us it's grinding work in the moment. But what then we have to look at is, where does it get to? What do we do? Um, you know, how does it actually get there? It gets there by these incremental, tiny improvements where in one day nothing happens, like literally nothing happens. In a year, something a little happens, right? And you think like, hey, I actually did a fair bit this year. And then in 5 years you're like, something is happening. And then in 10 years you're like, hey, something did happen. But you don't see any of those things until that 10 years out. And then it's not until 30 years that you realize that, hey, this was actually a really good idea, right? Like this was worth it. This was a this returned a pretty good return, right? And that's where we have to sort of stop thinking about the immediate, um, the fancy returns that you might think about, right? And I think that's where we get really messed up. And I think I I was taught sort of incorrectly, I guess, and in the sense that you only look for these super high return things, but you don't talk about that time element, and you don't talk about the what it feels like to do something that's legitimate, that is actually going to pay out, right? And that is the slow, boring, tedious, awful thing that nobody else wants to do, right? The vast majority of the people do not want to do it. It doesn't feel good. There's nothing special about it. It's completely unsexy, right? It's like doing things like cutting grass, right? Like getting up every weekend and cutting somebody's grass. It's things like, mowing lawns, right? It's things like doing something that is really monotonous, and that is, or sort of, it's things like driving for Uber, right? Like really monotonous, boring. Nobody likes those kind of things, but you do it, right? And that's how you actually get those compounding effects over time, right? If you do this sort of wisely, um, you get compounding effects over time, right? And you're looking for, in all areas of your life, like, how can I get compounding effects? What does that look like? What has its sort of return in the long run that pays off? And it's almost always, what those things are that pays off, right? It's like getting an accounting degree. Like nobody would ever say, hey, that wasn't like a wise thing to do. It's the sort of basic things that everybody knows, but it's just hard to actually do repeatedly over and over and over again, right? Like that's the trick, is looking at the thing that's difficult and that you're really, really struggling with. And that's what it should be. It should be a struggle. And I think we need to really take that into consideration. All right, take care and have a wonderful day.